How are you guys doing? Good. All right. I think we are going to go ahead and get started. We are moving into Daniel chapter 7 today. Big turn in the book of Daniel. And so we have a lot to kind of, it's a pretty short chapter, but there's a lot to unpack. So we're going to, instead of normally, I know we usually have a couple mics out and we have people reading. I'm going to do the reading today, but there's going to be plenty of opportunities for you guys to interject, and a lot of nice open-ended questions that sometimes we'll sit in silence for a few minutes because, I love that. But we are going to tackle some pretty heavy stuff today. I'm excited, and Lord help me. That's where I'm at. Well, Father, I thank you. I thank you that you are a good God. And you love us so much. And you desire to be so close to us. So, Lord, I'd ask you, be close to us today. Help us understand. Help us approach your word with humility, with reverence, and Lord, in a way that honors the method that you chose to speak to us through. Help me, Lord. Lord, I want to say what you want to say. So, Lord, have your way. I yield my tongue. I yield my mind to you. And, Lord, I ask for you to glorify yourself today as we dive in to your word in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we've been through, we're actually, based on the number of chapters, we are in the almost the exact center of the book of Daniel, which that in and of itself is an important thing. When the Jewish writers wrote their books, they tend to, put the most important stuff in the middle of what they were writing. Very different than a lot of the way we read books. We usually think, we had a climax and then the conclusion of our book, and that the end part, the happy ending or whatever is usually the most important, but not so much with Jewish writers, and the same is to be said with Daniel here. So to recap, we did, Daniel 1, that's the kind of the divine introduction of our protagonist, Daniel, and his friends. And we see God showing himself strong right off the bat, and kind of set the tone for the rest of the book by, nourishing Daniel and his friends during their fast, to show, showing himself faithful. We also see the introduction of Daniel's gift to interpret dreams and visions. That plays, of course, a big part in the rest of our book. Then we go to chapter 2, right? That's where it starts in what language? Come on, guys. What language is chapters 2 through 7 written in? Aramaic. Yeah, that's when the Aramaic starts. Okay, and we get the dream interpretation, the first one, right? Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue. Now, that's an important chapter because that chapter runs parallel to our chapter today, chapter 7. And we're going to make a lot of distinctions between the two, but a lot of similarities between the two as well. They kind of help us by looking at chapter 2, it helps us understand a little bit more chapter 7. But in that chapter, God's showing himself and shows his stages of his sovereignty. He moves in, power for his people, but he also shows his sovereignty over the nations and over their kings. And we see that continue to develop as we go, right? Chapter 3. What was chapter 3? What is chapter 3? Anybody remember? Ooh, I'm testing your memory here. Do it. That was number 2. The fiery furnace. there's another in the fire, right? We see God show himself strong for his people, right? Despite what Nebuchadnezzar, what the kings try to do, God's going to show up for his people and reward their faithfulness to him, despite the pressures and the threats, despite basically death. God was showing himself strong, right? Chapter 4. The dream of the tree. Dream of the tree. Do you guys remember when Nebuchadnezzar was lost his mind? Right? He saw this vision of chapter 2. Hold on. Let me make sure. Chapter 3, 4. Yeah, that's right. Because then we have Belshazzar. Okay, I was doubting myself there for a second. So yeah, we see him, God's sovereignty in dealing with the kings. He wasn't going to stand for the dishonor that Nebuchadnezzar brought. And then we see chapter 5, there are two parallels. We see the same thing happen with Belshazzar, right? Similar, he experiences the judgment very quickly for his dishonoring God and not and his arrogance towards the Most High, right? And then chapter 6 was parallel to the blazing furnace, right? It was the lion's den, right? Pastor taught on that. So we see God, moving again on behalf of his people, just like we saw in the furnace, and closing the mouths of the lions. And that's going to be that actually helps us a lot when we start to get into chapter 7 here, is understanding how God deals with animals, beasts, versus humans. They're going to draw a connection. So hopefully, as you see, everything in this book is all interwoven with each other, and understanding the book as a whole helps us get to the right understanding of what Daniel's trying to get across. So we're going to jump in. Keep in mind, right now we're making a big shift because we've spent 1 through 6. That is what a lot of scholars call the stories or the court tales. Okay, most of it is done in third person. It's all narrative. But then starting in chapter 7 and throughout the rest of the book, we get into the visions. This is where it gets real weird. Okay, and there's a term for this type of genre. It is apocalyptic literature. Now, anybody want some extra points to tell me what apocalyptic means? Say I hear future end times. What were you going to say? End of the world? That's usually what we think of it, right? It's not that's a very modern understanding of apocalypse. Apocalypse or apocalyptic is actually from a Greek word, okay, and that Greek word means to reveal. When we think of the book of Revelation, it's the book of the apocalypse of Jesus Christ, the revelation, the revealing of Jesus Christ. So we tend to think end times. And does apocalyptic literature generally deal with end times? Yes and no. But a good part of it does. That's one aspect of apocalyptic literature is dealing with the end times. But it's more about a revealing that God's doing through very interesting means, because usually apocalyptic literature uses really weird, crazy imagery, a lot of exaggeration, the timelines all over the place. We see, and we'll see with Daniel even here, much like John, we get in touch with the emotional side of the prophet, because it really throws not just us off when we read it, but the prophet himself's usually a bit disturbed by these things because they're very, very difficult to understand. And so that's important as we dive into here, because there is a lot of really interesting interpretations of this chapter and of this book and all apocalyptic literature. But what we have to what we have to do today as we approach this is we need to approach it with humility. There are going to be passages in here that we're going to hit that, honestly, we really don't know what they mean. Their details, their points were probably lost on us, thousands of years ago, or were never really meant for us to know. And so when I caution you guys, whenever you're listening to a teaching on an apocalyptic, passage, when you hear someone say, well, this definitely means this, or this clearly means this, I would shy away from that type of language, because you'll hear that from one preacher or one scholar, and then you'll turn around and hear another scholar go, well, this clearly means this, and they're both probably wrong. And so it's important that when we go through here today, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to try to tell you this is what this beast represents and this is what the horns represent. We're going to get to the point of what Daniel was trying to say, and the overall point of the vision. The details aren't for us to know at some point. So we can kind of guess, and we can throw some theories out there, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we've got to be careful that we don't get lost in the weeds, and that's what we're going to do today. Try not to get lost in the weeds. I do want to give opportunities for you guys to throw some ideas out there. There are some points I'm going to hit on to see where you guys are at, and what do you think about it, and share your knowledge. But we're going to avoid that kind of stuff today, and trying to be too specific and saying this is what this means, this is what that means, because again, I think it's approaching the passage with our own, trying to put it through our own lens versus the lens of the author was trying to bring. And I want to try to avoid that. Deal? Okay, so introduction, let's do it. I'm going to start here in verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and the summary of the words as follows. Daniel explained and said, I was looking in my vision in the night, and look, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts were coming up from the sea, differing from one another. So we're gonna stop there and take a look. So we're going back in time here a little bit, right? Because we're in the first year of Belshazzar. So this vision Daniel would have had just prior to the events of chapter 5? Yeah. Because of course we see Belshazzar dies at the end of chapter 5. So we're right around there. So again, Jewish writing, we think chapter 7, we're not going in chronological order here, right? We're jumping around a little bit. There's some imagery here that we can have a pretty good understanding of what's going on based on our understanding of Near Eastern mythology and Near Eastern thought. So I want to define that term, Near Eastern, so you guys understand what I mean by that. We're talking about the cultures, not Israel included, with cultures like Babylon, Persia, Media, Egypt, Canaan. A lot of these cultures that were present in and around Israel, because there are a lot of similarities in the way these cultures thought and the imagery that's used. And keep in mind, this is written in Aramaic, so even though there's a lot about the kingdom of God and things like that, it was still in a place where the Babylonians could read and understand. So right off the bat, this would read, if a Babylonian was reading this, they would go, oh, wow, this is going to be a good epic, because this opens up like a lot of other literature that they would be familiar with outside of the Bible. So we want to look at a couple symbols here. We see the winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. Now, can you guys think of a place in the Bible that talks about a wind or spirit, because the word is the same in the Hebrew, and a great sea? Genesis 1. can I just give a quick recommendation? If you're going to study any part of the Old Testament, get really familiar with Genesis 1 through 3 and Genesis 6. A little bit of 7. Because there is that part of the Bible, the writers later, they are constantly referring back to events and using terminology and things from those chapters. And if you can get a good understanding of those chapters, it's really gonna help you understand what's going on here. Because what we see is we see the four winds of heaven, which this idea of the four winds, the four cardinal directions, wind coming from, we're almost looking like a hurricane here, guys. Okay, we got winds blowing every direction. It's very tumultuous. Okay, and there's something to know, and this is actually your first little blank here. The sea was a common Near Eastern symbol for chaos. It was a symbol of chaos, because when Near Eastern person, a Jew or a Babylonian, looked into the Mediterranean and they just see the storms, and they see the water as far as they can see the unknown. There was no order there. And so when we even look at Genesis 1, the idea of the Spirit brooding over the waters and telling the waters where to go, it's God bringing order to chaos. And so this was a common idea in not just Jewish thought, but also the Babylonians as well. They have their own story of their God coming and killing the sea monster that represented the chaos and bringing it to order. So this imagery would have made a lot of sense to them, but we can understand that as well as Paul understood it when he said our God is a God of order, right? Not of confusion or chaos. He, in his mind, he's thinking back to Genesis 1, because that's what God does. He comes into chaos and he brings order. So right now, we don't see order happening. We're seeing a stirring, right? And that's where these four beasts are coming up. Now, this is what we kind of see as like an anti-creation story. Because in our creation, in Genesis, we see the beast being created from the earth, just like humans are, right? And humans being, put into authority over them. But here we see the beast coming up from the water. Now, if any of my people know Jewish law, what is some of the laws when it comes to dealing with animals that are like amphibious? Anybody pick up any of that when you guys maybe reading Leviticus? Because nobody skips Leviticus when you're doing your yearly Bible reading. In Jewish law, yeah. Don't eat it. Yeah, they were very unclean. So an animal that would be both water and land was considered highly unclean. You didn't eat it. So that right there would have brought up some understanding from our Jewish readers. As soon as they see and they read the animals coming out of the sea, they're going, "Oh, that's not good. Something's up here." As we go further, and you'll see when we get down to verse 17 a little bit later, because Daniel jumps around here a little bit from referring to the sea and referring to the earth. And that's important, because that idea of chaos, that sea is symbolizing the chaotic nations, the nations of the earth and the chaos that they have. And these beasts are coming up out of this chaos on the earth, okay? So that's the imagery that we're getting here. Let me see. We're going to go ahead and move on to verse 4 here. This is the fun one. So the first beast. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I was watching until its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth, and it was raised on its feet like a human, and a human heart was given to it. So I'll pause there. So the first beast here, okay, is a parallel to the head of gold, the statue's head of gold in Daniel 2. Now if we look at that and that beast, that should bring up some imagery there. If we remember what happened to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4. What kind of things do you guys pull for? If you think of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar and his whole stint as an animal, right? Basically, living like an animal, and then his mind coming back to him. What are some parallels that you guys see between the verse 4 and that story? Skin, yeah. It was his hair grew like feathers. Yeah. So there's your eagle wings, right? What else? It was raised on its feet like a human, and a human heart was given to it. Crawled around like an animal until he repented, basically, right? Yeah, when he repented, his mind came back to him. And in Near Eastern thought, the heart and the mind were the same. They didn't distinguish between the two. So when we see a human heart was given to him, it's no different than a mind. And so we see a replaying of Nebuchadnezzar's little stint as an animal happening here. What's interesting, though, is he's still a beast, like a lion, right? He may have stood up like a human, and he might have been given a human heart, but he was still a beast. Keep that in mind as we go forward, okay? Number 5, verse 5 here. And look, another beast, a second one, looking like a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 tusks or ribs. I put ribs in there. It's a little bit clearer on the translation there. Were in its mouth, between its teeth. And so it was told, arise, eat much flesh. Okay. So here is where, if you want to go for your next, let's see if you guys remember. Do you remember what the second part of the statue was? I gave you the first one, the head of gold. It was silver. The chest and arms of silver, right? That's the parallel in Daniel 2. So that's your blank there. And then there's a lot of there's the Medo, there's some that say the Medo-Persians, some say it's the Persians, some say it's the Medians. Sure. it could be. What we do know is there is some symbolism here. The idea of this beast being raised up on its side with 3 ribs in its mouth, the raising up on the side was a common motif in Babylonian and Persian art of being prepared to strike. So it's the idea that this beast was prepared to strike, okay, possibly the first beast. And in that case, we're looking at the Persians, or you could throw Median in there. That was a little bit later in the Persian rule. So it could go either way, but there's a good chance that we're talking about the Persians here, possibly. Again, it's not really, we'll get to realizing it's not really the point who it is. But we'll see that. So let's look at the third beast here. After this, I was watching, and look, another beast like a leopard. It had 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Okay, so here's checking your memory here, unless some of you guys already pulled up Daniel 2 and you're cheating. The third beast is a parallel to what? In Daniel 2. The belly and thighs of bronze. Yeah, the belly and thighs of bronze. Now, there's some interesting, this is where people go way different directions if you start to research this, which should always be a sign that if people can come to all these different solutions, maybe that's not the point. Just saying. But we see first that this creature has twice the number of wings as Babylon did. And that's important because there's the idea of twice the number of wings. It was twice as quick to strike. It was twice as, there was a ferociousness that was applied there. Now, when we look at the 4 heads, that in Babylonian art and imagery was generally represented the four quarters of the earth, which is a very common, a common idea in Near Eastern thought. Archaeologists have even found it's called a cylinder inscription of King Cyrus, which we've gotten to know King Cyrus a little bit already. And he actually identifies himself as being the monarch of the four quarters. And so it's the idea of basically the ruler of the world, and how they divided the world in their mind. And so whether this was the Midians, this is the person, I believe this might be Greece. And then it kind of depends on where you fall there. But again, we can get lost in the weeds there. We're going to go ahead and hit number, where we are. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and move forward here on number 7, verse 7. After this, in the visions of the night, I was looking, and there was a fourth beast, terrifying and frightful and exceedingly strong. And it had great iron teeth, and it was devouring and crushing, and it stamped the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the other beasts that preceded it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and look, another little horn came up among them, and 3 of the earlier horns were rooted out from before it. And there were eyes like the eyes of a human in this horn, and also a mouth that was speaking boastfully. Okay. So one big distinction here. Can you guys pick up on the one distinction between the fourth beast and the other 3? Yeah. There's no, and I kind of picked a word here. There's no, in this one, unlike the other beasts, this one has no zoological description. No zoological description. No, I didn't expect you to get the exact word, but it's concise, so I picked it. Zoological. So you can put an animal to it. There's theories out there about what that animal, what it looked like. Clearly, Daniel wasn't concerned about that because he was focused on the horns, right? He was like, I'm considering the horns. This fourth beast is a parallel to what in Daniel 2? What are our fourth empire here? What? The feet and legs of iron and clay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, clay and iron, right? The mixture. So, and we see that mentioned here as we talk about its great iron teeth, right? And even using some of the same language, is it a beast that's devouring and crushing? Okay, this is the same language that Daniel, when he interpreted a Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2, he mentioned the same thing. So we know we're here. We don't like. He's stuck on the horns. He sees the little horn. Weird stuff. And we'll come back to this a little bit later in the chapter as we get the interpretation. So we're not gonna. I know you're like, I'm moving on already because there's a lot there, but I don't want to get ahead of the game. So we're gonna keep rocking through this. Verse 9. I continued watching until thrones were placed, and an ancient of days sat. His clothing was like white snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool, and his throne was a flame of fire, and its wheels were burning fire. Okay. Ancient of days. When you guys hear that, what do you think? '90s worship music. Music? I might mess with you a little bit here with this, because one thing that as you start reading the Bible and kind of learning about translating and all of that, is you come to find out some translations that we come across in the English are based more on church tradition than what the passage may say. And the Ancient of Days, that phrase, you can go back early church days. It was it brought this idea of eternity and everything. But in reality, this is an Aramaic equivalent to a Hebrew phrase that just meant old man. Ancient of Days. Sounds very, enigmatic, like it's big, but it really means old man, advanced in age. It's actually the same phrase, just of course we're doing with the Hebrew and Aramaic are very close. So we see the Hebrew equivalent of this in Genesis 24:1. So when talking about Abraham, who was advanced Abraham was old, he was advanced in years or advanced in age. Advanced in age, same phrase. Ancient of Days. So I like how it says here, it says an Ancient of Days. Basically saying he saw an old man. And at that point in time, he saw him on a throne. It wasn't, we know now, we've read the rest of the passage, we know who that is. But we don't know we don't truly know, if we're brand new to this, till later in the passage that we know this is Yahweh. Okay, this is God. But it's just a little understanding of the wording there. It's really he's just saying it's an old man. He sees an old man, and this old man is sitting on a burning throne. That probably would have triggered something, right? We also see the wheels. It was a moving throne. Anybody know another prophet that saw a lot of moving thrones with wheels? Ezekiel. Yeah, you'll see a lot of terminology in this chapter that goes back to Ezekiel. Ezekiel was also preaching in another part of he was not near Daniel, but in the same time frame as Daniel was Ezekiel was also speaking. So you do see some similarities in how they approach what they see in visions and things like that. We're going to move to verse 10 here. A stream of fire issued forth and flowed from his presence. Thousands upon thousands served him, and 10,000 upon 10,000 stood before him. The judge sat, and the books were opened. This gives me chills when I read that part. The judge sat, and the books were opened. Interesting point here on your sheet. It says in Revelation 22, a river of what? What's flowing from the throne most of the time when we read, and we see it in another part. And I want to say it's Ezekiel as well. But what do we see flowing from the throne of God in other parts of the Bible? Life-giving water, right? We see life-giving water flowing from his presence. That's your blank there. Why is there now a river of fire being described here instead? Judgment, yeah. What else does fire generally represent? Purification, judgment, purification. And there's a third common warrior power. The power of God is usually, our God is a consuming fire. It's his power. In this case, judgment. Now, this is an important, break my neck here. This is an important idea to know when it comes to dealing with apocalyptic literature. Is there a stream of living water or a stream of fire coming from the throne of God? Yes. Or no. Because that's not he's seeing this vision as, these are symbols, guys. These are symbols that are speaking of what God is doing. God's beginning to get ready to judge the beast, the fourth beast, right? So it's appropriate that fire is coming from his throne, right? Do what? Could be both. Fiery water. I don't know. Water that's on fire. Do what? Yeah. Well, when we read it in Revelation 22, this is we're looking into the reign of Christ and the life-giving water with the trees planted by it and fruit for the nations this is all symbolism for aspects of what God's doing. So that's why we've got to, people get caught up in this kind of stuff. That's why I throw out those kind of questions, because some people will go, well, what is it? Is it a fire? Is it water? I don't know. It's because this is why it's important to understand the genre of the book that you're reading and how the writers use poetry and language and imagery to get a point across. It wouldn't be very effective to think about judgment if Daniel had said, and there was life-giving water coming from the throne and trees, and then he destroyed the fourth beast. Like, it didn't, right? It doesn't really fit. We're building, he's building up to a point here, and this vision that he was receiving was God's getting ready to show up in power and tell this beast where to go, right? So we've got to understand that don't let yourself get caught up on those details too much. When you see things like that are maybe you might look at them as contradictions if you don't know how the authors wrote back then. And this is very common for how they wrote, because it's definitely not a contradiction, not a bit. I want to pause here before we go forward. If anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to add? I should have paused a little earlier. I get excited. No? We'll keep trucking. Huh. Possibly. Possibly. We'll talk about that a little bit. It's possible. So let's go ahead and we're going to keep moving forward here. I'm get ahead of myself. So verse 11, I continued watching. Then, because of the noise of the boastful words of the horn who was speaking, I continued watching until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed, and it was given over to burning with fire. And as for the remainder of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but a prolongation of their life was given to them for a season and a time. What? This is a great example of a passage that's very difficult to really grasp, because at some point we may look at that and go, okay, we're dealing with the end times, but wait, these other beasts get to live for a while? What's going on there? Here's something to keep in mind when you're dealing with a lot of what jumps out at us as end times relevant. Now, there's some stuff in here we definitely, when we get to the culmination of the kingdom, we're definitely dealing with the end times here. But often, and I think Joel 2, that Peter quotes in Acts 2 is a perfect example, because he talks about this, after that baptism of the Holy Spirit, they're speaking in tongues, and he says this is the fulfillment of what Joel prophesied, and he quotes this whole verse, and it would it throws scholars off a lot, because it would have been great if he stopped to after everybody prophesying and seeing dreams and visions and all of that, but he doesn't stop there. He goes to past that and says, then the moon shall be turned to blood, and there shall be fire and smoke and all this stuff. Those are things that when we see that, we think that's the end times. But Peter's saying this has been fulfilled. The moon didn't turn to blood. That wasn't going on. So obviously, he wasn't mistaken. We might be a little off in our understanding of imagery of the poets. Prophets were poets. They used imagery. Most of those kinds of, when you deal with these kinds of like cosmic, occurrences, earthquakes and things, a lot of that's how the Jewish poets described God showing up. That was God showing up in power. A lot of books have been sold on blood moons, but I can tell you it's God showing up in power. It seems like it should be things in times worthy, but we're really dealing with imagery here, and the Jewish poets were big on that, and they weren't lying. It's how they got their point across. So that's important to go. If I look at this, I'm not this passage, unless anybody has a good understanding as to what these beasts being left alive means. I've done some research. There's a lot of just unsurety about this passage as to what it means. What we do know is that the beast was destroyed, which was the little horn's source. The little horn is often equated to what? Or who, I should say. Anybody know? My end times people? The Antichrist, often. Which is, yeah, could be. Yes, probably, actually. But maybe not how you think it. But, I'm going to get ahead of myself there. But it could be, yeah. But we see the Antichrist, we see the beast as a whole, right? The Antichrist is, if we think of the horn as the Antichrist, connected to the beast is the source. So that because of the Antichrist's boastful, the whole beast was destroyed, right? From the source. But these other beasts were allowed, these aren't good beasts, but they were allowed to live for a time. What we do know about that is it was only for a time. Mm-hmm. The other three beasts? Could be. John also in Revelation pulls a lot of bits and pieces from different parts of the Old Testament and kind of pieces them together to kind of get his point. So he may have been thinking about this when he described that. Possibly, yeah. The real thing is we don't know. This is one of those details that was probably lost to us, a detail that was lost a long time ago. But what we do know is that their life being prolonged was because of who? Huh? Who prolonged their life? God allowed them to live. He had the last say whether these empires, which is what we're looking at, these kingdoms, would live or die. That's the detail. That's the important point here. Let's keep going. I continued watching in the visions of the night, and look, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all the peoples, the nations, and languages would serve him. His dominion is a dominion without end that will not cease, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. Hallelujah. So we see the man coming from the clouds, okay? We see the famous Son of Man passage here. This is, anybody whose favorite designation, self-designation? Jesus. Yeah, Jesus. This was his reference. Okay, Son of Man is used in other parts of the Bible, but not this particular Aramaic phrase. And Jesus was very specific. When he used in the Greek, it's the same. It's a translation directly from our Greek Septuagint translation. So he was referring to Daniel when he said "Son of Man," even though like Ezekiel was called "Son of Man." Totally different words. So Jesus was definitely talking here. So this Son of Man serves as the bridge between God and man. So this is where any Babylonian reading this would go, okay, this makes sense. Yeah, kings are supposed to be like gods, so okay, they're still trekking with this so far. This still works for them. But there's some particular words here. You see that he's coming from the clouds of heaven. This is a contrast to the chaotic waters of the earth. So this man is coming from, this peaceful place to come and have dominion over the chaotic waters that represent the earth. Okay? So we're seeing the kingdom of heaven versus the kingdom of the worlds really shown in the imagery that Daniel's explaining here. This is being the connection between humanity and God. Jesus understood this. And he believed he was that one. He says it clearly I have John 1:51 here. It says, and he said to him, truly, truly, I say to all of you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. This was a reference back to Genesis, Jacob's ladder that we see, the angels, and he believed he was that ladder. He was that ladder, and he is that ladder. He's our connection to God. So we see that coming out here. And this also referring back to Daniel 2, right? The rock coming, right? And it would destroy, he would come and his, it would establish that the kingdom would never be destroyed, right? So let's keep going here. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was troubled within me, and the visions of my head terrified me. So I approached one of the attendants, and I asked him about the truth concerning all this, and he told me that he would make known to me the explanation of the matter. We're going to keep going here. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings. And I put in your notes, kingdoms. That's important. Who will arise from the earth. There's that 17 referring back to the seas, right? They came from the seas, didn't they? There you go, from the earth. So that helps us understand that imagery there. But the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom, and they will take possession of the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. Now, this is where it gets a little muddy, and I need to hit this. So we'll see how we do. How am I doing, Pastor? I'm already running a little behind here. So, okay. So I'm going to ask you guys first. Who do you believe Daniel was referring to when he says holy ones? The redeemed? Okay. The church? Okay. Anybody else? Uh-huh. The host of heaven being okay, so still the church. Okay. Anybody else? All right, I might mess you up a little bit. Okay. All right. Possibly. So when we look at a phrase like holy ones, if we want to get the understanding of what it is, we have to look at how the author uses it, because that helps get us a foundation of our interpretation. And the holy ones, if you look at it in a bunch of different translations, you're going to see a bunch of different things. You're going to see saints, you're going to see angels, you're going to see all sorts of things. Okay, so holy ones can be translated saints. It also can be used as an adjective to just mean holy. So we see Daniel use that word when he's quoting some of the kings, saying that Daniel has the spirit of the holy gods in him. That word holy, same phrase, okay, is used as an adjective to describe their gods. The other place he uses it is actually Daniel. It's actually, I taught on this one, Daniel 4:17, when we talked about the watchers. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, and the decision by the command of the holy ones, in order that the living will know that the Most High is so sovereign over the kingdom of humankind. So the sentence is by the decree of the watchers, and the decision by the command of the holy ones. Parallelism in poetry. Sentence, decision, decree, command, watchers, holy ones. So in that way, who's he talking about? Do what? The watchers. If you were here, the watchers were, we talked about, they were angels. They were a certain sect of angels that they were the watching ones, or the wakeful ones. They were present in the court. They were present in the courtroom with him, but they were given the task to watch, and that was common. We see a lot of that in Second Temple literature come out. So if we follow, and we also see him use holy ones a lot later in the next few chapters, and every time he uses it in other ways, it refers to angels. So that might make you, I think some of you looking at me made you shift in your seat a little bit. Because, wait a second, the angels of the Most High will receive the kingdom? No. Why would the angels receive the kingdom? This is where understanding our Jewish thought helps tremendously. Because, let me just read a passage for you. 1 Samuel 17:36. This is Daniel talking right before he goes and takes Goliath out. Your servant has struck down both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he defied the battle lines of the living God. Now hold up. Was God there? There was an army, right? Israel, right? Going up against the Philistines. But Daniel doesn't say you defied the battle lines of the chosen people of God. He says of God. Interesting. There is a connection, and this is something that got lost a long time ago and it starts in Greek thought. Greeks, and it kind of started there, they thought, we call it a dichotomy. They thought of spiritual stuff here and physical stuff here. We use the term supernatural a lot. If you were to talk to an ancient Jew about the supernatural, they would have no clue what you're talking about. Because in Jewish thought, there was no distinction between the natural and the supernatural. It was all intertwined. It was all related. It was the same to them. So when Daniel is saying the holy ones, taking possession of the kingdom, it doesn't mean we didn't. It doesn't mean the people of God did. It actually means the people of God did. And I'll show you as we get later, you'll see the distinction here, because there's a little phrase that Daniel makes a switch, and it's going to be one of our final passages. So stay with me. Don't lose me yet. You're going to see it in the passage here. All right. Then I desired to make certain concerning the fourth beast that was different from all the others, exceedingly terrifying with its iron teeth and its claws of bronze. It devoured, crushed, and stamped the remainder with its feet. And concerning the horns that were on its head, and concerning the other horn that came up, and before which 3 horns fell. And this horn, there we go. I almost lost my spot. And this horn had eyes and a mouth speaking boastfully, and its appearance was larger than its companions. Wait a second. It's an interesting part, isn't it? Wasn't it the little horn? Does it mean the other horns were even littler? I don't know. It may have just been his boastfulness that made him appear larger. I don't know. But it's just I don't know the answer to that question. I just find it interesting. I continued watching, and this horn made war with the holy ones, and it prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, the old man, came and gave judgment to the holy ones of the Most High. And the time arrived, and the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. Oh, there we are again. So here we go. The war between the holy ones and the horn is a spiritual war that also manifests in the physical realm. So this whole last half of Daniel is the main focus is on giving us a look into the spiritual. And as we get into, I don't want to get too far into Daniel 10, but when you see Michael coming in, Gabriel talking about Michael, he's talking about Michael being held up by the Prince of Persia, right? Well, the Prince of Persia was not a person. We're talking about an angelic being, antagonistic being that's holding back. We're seeing there's a war going on here. And so what we're seeing in this war is these holy ones that are our representatives And the author of Hebrews understood that. They were ministers, right? Author 1:14, are they not all spirits engaged in special service, sent on assignment for the sake of those who are going to inherit salvation? They're ministering spirits to us, right? So are they not fighting on our behalf? And does not their victory, is that on our victory? So there's no distinction in Jewish thought between the angels winning a battle and the people of God winning a battle, or God winning a battle and the people of God winning a battle. If God wins, we win, because that's how they thought. So just because he's talking about angels does not throw off our theology of it being about the people of God, but it does help our interpretation of what's going on, and it should help us understand how much heaven is for us, because they don't distinguish between the two, the people of God winning and the angels winning, the people of God winning and God winning. There's no distinction. Follow me here? Okay. I won't get into that. And he said, verse 23 here, and he said, the fourth beast is the fourth kingdom that will be on the earth, that will be different from all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth, and it will trample it, and it will crush it. And as for the 10 horns coming from it, from this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue 3 kings, and he will speak words against the Most High, and he will wear out the holy ones of the Most High, and he will attempt to change times and law, and they will be given into his hand for a time and 2 times and half a time. All right. So this goes into that. There's, again, much debate about whether this fourth beast is Greece or Rome. I've seen some really cool breakdowns for Greece. I mean, like the 10 kings, the 3 kings that fall off. You have Antiochus Epiphanes. His attack on Jerusalem and the temple and all of that lasted for 3.5 years. Really interesting stuff. But then there's some good stuff on Rome too. The point here that we don't know, but in reality, this guy isn't going to win. Something to keep in mind about the 3.5. 3.5 is half of 7. 7 is the number of completion, right? So in the sense of the 3.5, we're looking at an incomplete. Take that for what it is. It could be the idea of the people of God continuously fighting these kinds of these battles, dealing with little horns that pop up. But at some point, God's going to come and end it all. And they'll never have to fight that battle again because he's faithful. Here we go. Then the court will sit, and his dominion will be removed, to be eradicated and to be destroyed totally. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven. Oh, there's the 3. I guess this is where our 3 other beasts have found their end. Will be given to the nation. Now, I put parentheses people there. Okay? It's a little bit of a better translation here. Of the people of the holy ones of the Most High. The people of the holy ones of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts terrified me greatly, and my face changed over me, but I kept the matter in my heart and took a break. I have that last part. Poor guy. So this is the distinction that I mentioned earlier. We see him, and we mentioned, again, this will come up again in chapters 8, 9, 10. I checked. It says the people of the holy ones of the Most High. So we see again, this is where Daniel's interchanging here. The people of the holy ones of the Most High receive the kingdom and dominion, right? So you don't, flay me on my way out. This is where we see that to Daniel, there was no difference between the people of the holy ones and the holy ones. The holy ones won, the people of the holy ones won. people of the Most High One, the Most High One. And this is important because we understand this. Are we not seated with Christ in heavenly places? When God looks at us, he sees his son, right? We talk about this. We say these things, but that is Jewish. That's how they thought. And that's how we should think if we really understand who we are in Christ. And how, it gets, dominion theology that can get really crazy, but there's an aspect of that is true, is that when God wins, we win. And that's something that should change the way we think, how we move and go about our daily lives. When we really want the supernatural, when in reality, God's present in everything. And I think sometimes we lose that, because we're looking for this other above when God is in it all. I want to ask you guys these last two questions because I'm already beyond my time. But I do want to ask this last one. Knowing what we know now about how God views his relationship with his people and the angels, this whole idea of this, using the terms interchangeably, because it's his victory is our victory, and the angel's victory is our victory, and his victory, it's all the same. What kind of implications should that have in our lives? How should that affect how we live? It should. That is a real question that I'd like to hear some answers for before I let you go. Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's no distinction in that to the Jew when they thought about that it was somehow separate. It's hard to wrap our minds around because we don't think like that. But you're exactly right. There's those things, sowing in the physical to reap, or vice versa. There's no tasting something, feeling something that's no less spiritual. It's just because it's in the physical. There's some awesome authors, a lot of the Christian mystics from the 1700s, 1800s that really grasped that concept a lot better than we do now. And a lot of them were deemed heretics because of it. But in reality, they had an understanding of the connection between the physical and the spiritual was a lot closer than what we usually separate them. We almost live, I call it kind of, it's like atheistic Christianity, because it's like God shows up when it's something that's above the natural law. But as long as it's the natural law, well, God's not necessarily in it. We wouldn't say that out loud, but a lot of times we think it. Exactly. If a volcano went off, the Jews looked at the power of God. We look at it as a seismic event. But it's still the power of God, right? There's no distinction. Anybody else want to add something there? You still love me? I might have shaken you up a little. You don't have to agree with me. It's okay. But I wanted to give you a different idea, a different thought. And I think it's important because knowing how heaven and earth work and how God moves and through his people, with his people, and how it's all intertwined. It's complicated stuff. This is I could keep you here till 9 o'clock, but I won't. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We do. Western thought's very heavily influenced by that, yeah. And it turned into heresy for a while, if you remember Gnostics. Gnostics believed that, everything physical was evil, and everything spiritual was good. And they turned in a whole thing. Jesus didn't have a physical body. He was just, it just looked like he did. I mean, it got crazy. But that philosophy, that heresy came out of that thought of the separation of physical and spiritual. And it still is in our thought processes when we think of the Bible and think of how God moves. But it's not biblical. In all honesty, it's not biblical. All right. Anything else? I'll let you guys go. Sorry, I kept you a little later. Hope you guys enjoyed the study. It's a hard one, but I had fun. All right, guys. Lord, I thank you. I thank you for your word. I thank you that you give us so much to overwhelm us with just your goodness, and we could spend forever, and we will spend forever tasting of your majesty and to just attempt a little bit to understand how you work. It's a humbling experience. So God, I thank you that you are present in the mundane. You're present in every aspect of our lives, and that there is no separation between us and you, and there isn't, because of Jesus. And we thank you for that. Lord, I ask you to bless everyone's week. I ask you to show yourself in power in their daily lives, in the moments when they're brushing their teeth, when they're putting on their shoes, and they're driving to work, that you're in it and you're with it. And you're just not waiting for them in a building somewhere or in that closet where they pray. Father, I thank you, and we give you glory in Jesus' name. Amen.